We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world.
For decades, the US dollar has reigned supreme as the world's go-to currency for international trade, but now a growing number of countries are breaking away from this tradition and exploring alternative options. Join us on a journey through the shifting economic tides as we explore why China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Brazil, and others are looking beyond the greenback. To understand the current situation, let's first go back in history to see how the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. A reserve currency is a foreign currency that is held by central banks and other major financial institutions as a store of value. Countries hold reserves in reserve currencies as a way to ensure that they have a stable and liquid asset that can be used to settle international transactions, pay off debts, and stabilize their own currency in times of economic uncertainty. The US dollar's rise to reserve currency status can be traced back to the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. This agreement established the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at a fixed exchange rate of $35 per ounce. Under this system, other countries could exchange their dollars for gold at this fixed rate, giving them confidence in the value of their holdings. At the time, the US had emerged as a superpower following World War II, and the dollar was seen as a stable and reliable currency. The Bretton Woods system helped to establish the US as the dominant economic power in the post-war world, with other countries holding significant amounts of US dollars as a store of value. However, the system began to unravel in the 1960s as the US faced mounting economic challenges, including inflation and a large balance of payment deficit. In 1971, US President Richard Nixon announced that the US would no longer convert dollars into gold at a fixed rate, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system and ushering in a new era of floating exchange rates. Despite its ultimate collapse, the Bretton Woods Agreement remains a significant milestone in the history of the global economy. It helped to establish the US dollar as the dominant currency for international trade and finance, and paved the way for the development of modern international economic institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. Over time, the US dollar's dominance as the world's reserve currency became entrenched. Today, over 60% of all foreign bank reserves are held in US dollars, and over 80% of all global foreign exchange transactions involve the dollar. One reason for the dollar's continued dominance is the size and stability of the US economy. The US has the world's largest economy, and the dollar is seen as a safe haven currency in times of economic uncertainty. Additionally, many commodities, such as oil, are priced in dollars, further increasing demand for the currency. As we now know when and why the US dollar became the reserve currency, we can shed light on the current state of affairs. In recent years, the US dollar's dominance has come under threat. As other countries, including China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Brazil, and others, seek to diversify their currency holdings and reduce their reliance on the dollar, the global economic landscape is shifting. Russia and China are working together to lessen their reliance on the dollar, which some experts believe could lead to a financial alliance between the two countries. According to recent data from Russia's central bank and Federal Customs Service, the dollar's share of commerce between Russia and China fell below 50% in the first quarter of 2020 for the first time in history. Only 46% of settlements between the two countries involved the use of the dollar. At the same time, the euro represented a record high 30% of the total, and their national currencies represented a similarly high 24%. Over the past few years, the use of the dollar in bilateral trade between Russia and China has decreased significantly. About 90% of bilateral transactions were made in dollars as recently as 2015. However, after the start of the US-China trade war and a determined effort by both Moscow and Beijing to abandon the dollar, the percentage fell to 51% by 2019. The de-dollarization of the Russia-China relationship was approaching a breakthrough moment, according to Alexei Maslov, director of the Institute of Far Eastern Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences, who spoke to the Nikkei Asian Review. This may transform their partnership into a de facto alliance. He further said, "The collaboration between Russia and China in the financial sphere tells us that they are finally finding the parameters for a new alliance with each other. Many expected that this would be a military alliance or a trading alliance, but now the alliance is moving more in the banking and financial direction, and that is what can guarantee independence for both countries." Since 2014, when Russia and China started increasing their economic relations as a result of Moscow's alienation from the West over its annexation of Crimea, de-dollarization has been a top aim for both countries. To avoid American sanctions against Russia, it became necessary to replace the dollar in trade transactions. Dmitry Dolgin, the senior economist for Russia at ING Bank, stated that any wire transaction that takes place in the world involving US dollars is at some point cleared through a US bank. That means the US government can tell the bank to freeze certain transactions. After the Donald Trump administration put tariffs on Chinese imports worth hundreds of billions of dollars, the process acquired additional traction. De-dollarization was formerly spearheaded by Moscow, but Beijing later began to see its importance. According to Zhang Xin, a research fellow at the Center for Russian Studies at Shanghai's East China Normal University, only very recently did the Chinese state and major economic entities begin to feel that they might end up in a similar situation as our Russian counterparts, being the target of the sanctions and potentially even getting shut out of the SWIFT system. A 3-year 150 billion yuan or 24.5 billion USD currency swap agreement between China and Russia was inked in 2014. The agreement made it possible for one nation to use the other's currency without having to swap their own. In 2017, the agreement was renewed for 3 years. A further significant event occurred in June 2019 during the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Russia. Moscow and Beijing agreed to use their own national currencies instead of the dollar when making international payments. In order to trade in rupees and yuan, the agreement required the two parties to create substitute payment systems for the SWIFT network, which is dominated by the United States. Russia has been rapidly building up yuan reserves at the expense of the dollar in addition to trading in national currencies. Russia's central bank disclosed at the beginning of 2019 that it has reduced its dollar holdings by $101 billion, or more than half of its total dollar assets. The yuan was one of the greatest winners from this decision, seeing its percentage of Russia's foreign exchange reserves increase from 5% to 15% as a result of the central bank's $44 billion investment in the Chinese currency. The change led to Russia gaining a quarter of the global yuan reserves. The Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund was given authorization by the Kremlin earlier this year to start purchasing Chinese and yuan state bonds. Maslov highlighted that Russia's drive to amass yuan goes beyond simply diversifying its foreign exchange reserves. Moscow also helped to inspire Beijing to take a stronger stand against Washington's dominance of the world economy. Maslov stated that Russia has a considerably more decisive position toward the United States than China does. Russia is used to fighting. It does not hold negotiations. One way for Russia to make China's position more decisive, more willing to fight, is to show that it supports Beijing in the financial sphere. But it won't be simple to unseat the dollar. According to Jeffrey Frankel, an economist at Harvard University, the dollar has 3 key advantages. It can maintain its value through limited inflation and depreciation, its incredibly large domestic economy, and it has deep, liquid, and open financial markets. He stated that no competing currency has so far demonstrated the ability to exceed the dollar on all 3 points. Frankel cautioned that although the dollar's position is safe for the time being, growing debts and an overly aggressive sanctions strategy might eventually undermine its dominance. Furthermore, he said sanctions are a very powerful instrument for the United States, but like any tool, you run the risk that others will start to look for alternatives if you overdo them. I think it would be foolish to assume that it's written in stone that the dollar will forever be unchallenged as the #1 international currency. It remains to be seen whether the dollar will continue to hold its dominant position in the years to come. However, the move away from the US dollar for international trade and finance by some countries could have significant implications for the United States in the long run. Here are a few potential outcomes. Number 1. Reduced demand for US dollars. As countries begin to shift away from the US dollar, demand for the currency could decrease, which could lead to a decline in its value relative to other currencies. This could make it more expensive for the US to import goods and services, and could also make it more difficult for the government to finance its debt through the sale of treasury bonds. Number 2. Potential loss of influence. The US dollar has been a key source of global economic and political influence for the United States. If the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is diminished, it could lead to a decline in US influence and power on the world stage. Number 3. increased competition. As more countries look to establish alternative currencies or payment systems for international trade and finance, the US could face increased competition from other countries or groups of countries. This could make it more difficult for the US to maintain its economic dominance and influence. Number 4. Opportunities for innovation. On the other hand, the move away from the US dollar could also create opportunities for innovation and growth in the US economy. As countries seek out new currencies or payment systems for international trade, US businesses and entrepreneurs could develop new technologies and systems that could be adopted globally. It's worth noting that the shift away from the US dollar is a gradual process, and it remains to be seen how significant the long-term effects will be. However, it's clear that the trend could have important implications for the US economy and its role in the world.